Two and one. Hello, everyone. Come on in. We're ready to get started with session number 4 for today. Come on in. Come on in. Let's give them a minute because many of them are clicking over from the previous presentation into this one.
You bet.
All righty. And I'm going to do a little introduction before you get started. And I want to see how many people are in. That kind of gives me a good idea that no one's having problems with any of the links or anything.
Yeah, you bet.
Okay. Let's give it 15 more seconds. Okay. Good afternoon and welcome. Um, I would like to welcome our next presenter. This presenter is from the state of Washington, Washington State, correct? I just want to double check. All right, because I did see that DC behind there. She is an elementary school librarian, and welcome now. We'd like to welcome Rebecca Winecoop. Am I pronouncing her last name correctly?
You did. That's impressive.
Okay.
Nicely done.
Okay, okay. All right. So, Rebecca, I'd like for you to take it away, and I'll be here in the chat just adding in information for our attendees. All right.
Great.
Welcome.
Thank you, Casey, so much for having me. I have just really enjoyed the last day and a half. Managed to squeeze in a concert last night with my family in the Gorge over in Eastern Washington, which is gorgeous. If you haven't been there, it's beautiful. It's an amazing place to see a concert. But I'm ready and excited to share with you all a little bit about how you can build special collections in school libraries with the idea of catching all of your library users. My name is Rebecca Winecoop. My Twitter and Instagram handles are at MRS_Winecoop. We'll cover that at the end, but let's just go ahead and get started. I am currently, as of this summer, a librarian at Frank Love Elementary School in North Shore School District. I recently left a middle school position. I'd been there for 5 years at Robert Eaglestaff Middle School in Seattle. So after 15 years and 3 libraries in Seattle schools, I'm moving up to the North Shore School District. And I'm a little more anxious to be here today than I am to move back to elementary, but a high level of excitement and anxiety for both. This is my 22nd year in school libraries, and I'm really excited to share with you an idea that started for me about 10 years ago. And I'll be completely honest, I have not had a great deal of consistency myself in how it was implemented, but I am right at the beginning of starting in this new library, and my brain is just firing on all cylinders about how I can do things a little bit differently and how I can build on things that have been successful in the past. So, about 10 years ago, a colleague that I'd worked with had a daughter going off to college and they were cleaning everything out. And she bequeathed to my then 6-year-old daughter a slew of American Girl dolls and clothes and accessories. And if y'all have been in the middle of the American Girl doll machine and consumerism of that, there's amazing and a multitude of things that you could end up with. So we were the Bagley Bees at the time. You can see this particular doll has a bag she comes in. We got her a little costume. She came with a journal. So kids would take her home for a week and they journal their week and then share it with other people. And this was kind of my first foray into how we can build special collections that not only meet some of the or extend the interests of students, but also create connections for families between school and home. And for anybody who's in the room who's like, oh, elementary dolls, or, this is far beyond the elementary level. I have used, and I'll show you some applications of special collections, both the middle school and the high school level, as we move forward. So, a couple of things that are foundational to why I believe that special collections are important in school libraries is that not every student has found their reading identity. And I know over the last, 24, 48 hours, we've heard a lot about how do we connect with our students and how do we help them find their way to being capable and confident library users. And what does that mean? Because for some kids, that might mean checking out an entire series. For other students, that might mean making personal connections with other kids in the library, with their families when they go home, with the librarian in the room. There are lots of different ways that students can connect to our school libraries, and our reading identities change over time. And so continuing to build collections, whether they're in print, digital, or other, are really important to continue to help them navigate that as they grow. In addition, we all connect in different ways to the world. And I've been thinking a lot about my new space and thinking about my neurodivergent students and how just walking into a library with rows and rows of books and lots of different colors, and how for some students that can be really disruptive. And so what can I do around that to change the environment to make it an easier, softer landing place as I come in? And so that helps remind me that my students are going to connect to our library in a lot of different ways. Our access to materials should, right, go beyond books, but it it often the things that we give them access to beyond the books, right? We check books out, we send books home, but the makerspace activities, all of the tools and the fun things that we do in the library are often limited in scope, in time. In the elementary level, that's before school potentially, maybe at lunch if they're allowed to come in the building for a recess, or with their class, which in addition to a lesson, that time is just limited. And so I started thinking about how I was going to do this differently this year, because the librarian I'm replacing is amazing, Miss Persine, and she really focuses K2 on play-based learning and wanting kids to be able to use things and manipulate things. And so I wanted to think of more ways that I could extend that learning home and beyond books. And so the same thing is true at the middle school and high school levels, and quite frankly, maybe even less access when you get a less structured visit to the library. If your teachers are working collaboratively with you as the librarian, students may not see you as frequently, unless they're able to make space for that in their day. Also, parents. Honestly, parents are just looking for ways to connect to what's happening with their students on a day to day basis. And we know that as they get older, we tend to see a disconnect, right? When parents stop maybe volunteering or donating to their elementary school libraries, um, then, or as students are saying, a little less mom or dad, grandma or grandpa or aunt or uncle, a little less of the adults in my life at school is something they're looking for, but still wanting to bridge that gap. So just looking for additional ways to connect. And it's also, as families, just fun to try new things without having to invest a great deal of money into trying things out. I have a niece who I adore, and her life, I'm convinced she is going to do a million amazing things, but she's also already done a million amazing things. And the financial burden that that can place on families is something that libraries can help mitigate. And we can allow kids to explore interests without families feeling the pinch of that financial burden. So I've taken special collections and for this presentation kind of divided them into three categories: consumable, things that you send home and you know you'll never get back; reusable, things that come back and can be checked out again over and over and over again; and then there is a category of things that are both consumable and reusable. I've listed a number of options here. I'm going to give you specific examples in each one, but I thought I'd really quickly point out some of my favorites. Under consumable, things like buttons and pins. We have a button maker in our library, and if you haven't gone down that road yet, I highly recommend it. It's a really great creative outlet. You can buy some pretty inexpensive and super sturdy models, but you can also, if you get a grant and you have access to that kind of funding, get the heavy duty made of steel. Nobody's going to break it, and it's literally going to last decades and go from student to student to student. In my library, the button maker stays at home. It's heavy and it's cumbersome, but what you can do is send home the pre-cut circles to students. You could check out special watercolors or gel pens or whatever they were also interested in using to create their buttons. And then they go home and they could make buttons and bring them back. It could be a gift for a friend. It could be something for a parent or a birthday of a cousin or a sibling. Like, there's lots of ways that we can use these things, even though they're consumable. And in the long run, beyond the initial purchase of the button maker, the supplies beyond that are relatively inexpensive. Some of you, we've seen seed libraries. Our public libraries have some pretty great options for additional special collections, and definitely taking the lead here with some of that. Pipe cleaner pumpkins this last fall in my middle school, we probably had 720 students. We probably had a few thousand pipe cleaner pumpkins around the school for a few weeks, and it was probably one of the most engaging activities we'd done in a really long time. But just being able to send pipe cleaners home with students um, extends the day. If you build one pumpkin in class and you're like, but wait, I didn't finish, go ahead, send things home. We will talk in a little bit about how you can replenish those consumable items for sure. Reusable, things that you already have in your library that you could create a system for sending home and allowing students to bring that back. The doll that I showed earlier with the clothes or the toys that go with it is an example. We have a train table and a Lego table in our elementary library, and sending home smaller kits of those things with students extends their excitement. It allows them to go home and say to their family, today I played with Izza in the library and we built this, and look what I can do. Or will you play with me? And building some of those connections. At the secondary level, if I were staying in my middle school, I was planning to start a video game library, right? Our kids are going home and they're playing video games, and they're expensive, right? So getting donations of what are you not using anymore, looking at different gaming systems, you could start small. Ask your community for donations of unused Xbox games. Drop those CDs in the same cases we used to use for CDs for music, which you could also still have as a special collection, and allow families and kids to begin to explore beyond what they have to purchase. What could they use? For both things like baking supplies during the pandemic, actually, or right before March of 2020, I had put a call out to our community and said, want to clean out your kitchen? Remember when everybody was cleaning their houses because we were in our homes and we were like, holy cow, there's more stuff here than I could possibly ever use. And people started making those runs to things like Goodwill and the Salvation Army, and we could use those things in our libraries. Um, and so, how could baking supplies were an easy one. I just said, hey, go ahead, clean out your kitchen. Where are those cookie cutters, the lobster cookie cutter that you bought for that one time, or the muffin tins that you happen to have four of and you only need two? And we built a baking collection and then began to add some of the consumables to it, like a muffin pan liner, for example. That was an example of something that's both you return the muffin tin, but you consume the the actual paper liner that goes in there. So, real quick, a few examples of each of these. Under consumable on the left hand side, we're looking at felting. buying large sheets of felting, providing templates for kids, sometimes needles, right? Because not everybody has a needle and the thread that they need to take home, and don't have to go buy it when you can borrow it. Um, and during the pandemic, we had a group of students at a high school. Actually, the second picture on this particular slide, they were putting together makerspace kits for kids to take home from our curbside library. And this was a practice where I stopped and I was like, wait, why not do that all the time? How could we create a way for students to be engaged in what crafts do you want to make? What makerspace activities do you want to make available? And how could we extend that learning and send that home? Picture of our button maker, and then a seed garden here where you provide the compostable paper cup that the dirt goes in, the dirt and the seeds, with instructions for how to do that at home. Under our reusable category, Legos, games. Oftentimes we had a game collection in our library, but again, if the time is limited to before school, after school, lunch, or other, and you can't play a full game, why not give students a chance to take something home and borrow it? Slap a barcode on that sucker, stick it in a paper bag, and send it home, and let kids borrow them. There, you can put them in your catalog. You can begin to track circulation statistics of those things. Rubik's Cube, if you haven't looked into, you can do Rubik's online. They have great educational programs. And that's a really easy thing to send home. Also, puzzles. If you haven't started doing puzzles in your library, it's a pretty great community building piece, and a lot of families like to do this, but a lot of people just do a puzzle one time. So spending $15 on a puzzle to do one time isn't always, you know, something everyone's interested in doing. But if you could borrow it from the library, that's another way you could use and reuse items. Um, Reusable and consumable. These are just a few. We did a bookmark. You could do your classic bookmark, right? You could always send bookmarks home, or paper, or the corner foldable bookmarks. Anything you would do as a makerspace activity, you could create a kit to then allow a student to take and extend that learning and share that learning at home. But the bookmarks on the left, we actually used a sewing machine in the library where you can freehand, and then you use permanent markers to color them in, and then you spray them with an isopropyl alcohol and water mixture, and then it kind of spreads and makes this watercolor reaction. And a really cool, just on a canvas, we ripped up canvas, and students were able to make some really interesting designs, but we didn't have enough time to finish them at school. And so it was a really great thing to be able to send home. And if they wanted to borrow 15 Sharpies from the library, we let them borrow a rainbow of 15 Sharpies, and they bring them back. The good news is, with the books, the foundation that we've laid with books, we also can use the same principles of borrowing and returning to other items. You can see the baking collection is here. Perler beads or fuse beads. Obviously, the beads get melted, right? But the plates that you use to design on can be reused and checked out. Even for some families, honestly, not everybody has an iron. So could you have an iron that you check out? In a moment, I'll talk to you about communicating with families. That is important when you're talking about things that, heat up and plug in, and how could these affect maybe the environment at home, and wanting to make sure families are on board with that. And then just any kind of card making, go ahead. Send things home with kids. Let them make birthday cards for their teachers, or their friends, or someone at home. So a few considerations: just communication with families. For some of the items, I would send a letter home inside with the kit, just saying, one, sometimes using the library is about reassuring families that there's not a financial burden to them, right? And recognizing that the trauma of past library practices may still exist for those families, and wanting them to know that we're sending this home with the intent that you use this together, and we understand that some of these things aren't going to come back. So that might be different for a puzzle versus card making supplies. And so just having some way to communicate with families, also repeatedly using, um, celebrating and promoting your special collections in your newsletter, and making sure families know they're available. Fairness and equity, students obviously are going to be concerned about, well, how come I didn't get that? And thinking about ways in which you want to make sure that every student can get to what they need, because we're not going to have one of everything for everybody, you know. In even a school of 320 elementary school students, that's a lot. So, what does this look like? And how do we ensure that we are not creating barriers? Just like we do this with our books, and want to make sure that a fine or a lost book or a forgotten book doesn't keep a student from continuing to read. We want to be able to do the same things with the special collections that they might check out. Student voice, asking them what they want. Storage and transportation, what are you going to store it in? Honestly, Ziploc bags. You can barcode those. You can change the record constantly. You can put whatever you want it. You could have students make their own makerspace kits. Missing pieces, just, make in your own mind a mental note for at what point is something like a puzzle with 2 pieces missing not that big of a deal. With 15 pieces missing, might be time to get that one out of rotation. And then just a few hints for where you might get what you need with little or no budget. Final thoughts on this? Go ahead, just start with 1 or 2 ideas. For me, it was the dolls, and the taking those home for a week, and the journal, and having kids bring them back and share that. And it just we had a sign up, and there were holds all year long, and that doll went from house to house to house to house to house. Maybe it's just as simple as the baking library, or creating small kits of your maker space, anticipating that some kids will want to continue to work with those at home. Some things you might just hand over and not check out, right? If it's just cards and stickers and stamps, maybe you just send those home without the formal checkout. But some of them you might want to have checkout and maintain circulation statistics for. Um, Look for opportunities to connect to books and resources. Maybe you introduce a new checkout when you're starting a new unit on trees, for example, and you're going to talk about how seeds grow. And there's an opportunity to introduce a seed library. I'm thinking about how students can help. How can students help you? Do you have library helpers? Do you have TAs? I have TAs in the middle school, and they were perfect for making sure that our baking library was up to snuff and that everything was in order and students could find what they need, but also letting them create or think about different ways that they could create special collections that they know their peers would like. We had a student who wanted to start a CD library, and she was ready to, we just didn't get to it until the end of the year, but she was ready to survey students and find out what kinds of music that they would want, and how we could go about finding those things in our community. So I'm down to my last minute, and just in case you would like to follow up with questions, or stay in contact with me, you can find me in a number of ways on Twitter and Instagram at MRS_winecoop. I am on YouTube. More so during the pandemic, but I'm trying to continue with that at Mrs. Winecoop, and then at Stay True to Your Shelf on TikTok, which is a fairly new venture for me, but one that I am enjoying finding a little more creativity in. And I am, again, really quickly before Casey jumps back in, I just wanted to say thank you, Casey, for this opportunity. The last 2 days have really been such a phenomenal way for me to connect with other librarians and learn from each other. And I feel really, truly honored to be able to present to you all today. Thank you.
Exactly. The sentiment is the same. And I follow you on TikTok. So hey, yeah, I have 3 questions for you. So let's see if we can
Okay,
knock them out before 2:15 or before we start lunch.
great.
Um, Kat is asking, how good is the return rate on the special collections, like the Rubik's cubes and so
Yeah.
forth?
Yeah, pretty good. When obviously when you have something barcoded and in the collection, like when it's checked out to a student, you have a much higher return rate. We had one item that I lost this year because it just never came back. It was one of those balls. That's the game where it's like a maze and you kind of try and wiggle the ball, through to the end. And that one never came back. But I never found a way to track it. And so I would go back and think about that a little bit differently. Pretty high return rate. We get most of our stuff back. Um, but just like books, I never get 100% of my books back, and I'd rather lose a book than a reader. I feel exactly the same way about our special collections. Some of these things are going to go home and never come back. And if that's a muffin tin and that family makes, muffins for the next year, I'm okay with that. Um, and I know that sometimes with smaller budgets that can be hard, but just trying to think about what the impact is on the user, and a little trying to dial back the impact on me as the librarian at that point.
Hmm. Totally
Mm.
understand that.
Yeah.
And you talked about this, and then there was also a comment in the chat regarding how do you handle the lost pieces or parts of a reusable sets.
Yeah.
Some were saying hit up the um, garage sales in the
Garage
neighborhood.
sales, if you have buy nothing in on your Facebook page, like I use buy nothing constantly, and that's where I find a lot of refills for stuff. Sometimes you just have to say this puzzle's done. and and that's okay. The same thing is true with a book. Honestly, the same principles apply. If, the book is damaged, if it's been waterlogged, those are sometimes we just have to say you served a good life and lots of people enjoyed you and now you're done. But it can be challenging, but that's also why I say start small. If you have a bunch of things you're trying to manage, it can be overwhelming.
Yeah, this is a good one. But I know it's going to be kind of difficult to answer. What tips do you have for layouts, for a layout within a physical space of the library? How do you
Yeah,
set
that's
up
it.
a makerspace versus the rest of the library space, reading nooks, etc.? And I can chime in too because I have a
Sure.
makerspace and it's challenging.
It can be challenging. Sometimes it's a matter of identifying one section of shelving, and you're going to start small and you're going to put these things here where students can find them. For our baking collection, we had a dedicated shelving unit that was mobile. That was really cool with whiteboards on each side, and that worked really well for keeping that material there. In in our library, I had been on both sides. I'd had a dedicated makerspace that I lost due to an increased enrollment, but then got back again. So I'd been through I don't have a makerspace. Where do I put this? For me, that was using a table, and just students knew that that's where they could find the makerspace materials. Um, or then when it moved into the larger space, then dedicating that space. But Casey, what do you have to add to that?
I have that fear too. I have a dedicated physical makerspace location, and it's a threat that I could lose it because of enrollment. And
Right.
so I'm anticipating that. So I'm using a lot of like vertical storage bins,
Hmm.
trying my best to keep things organized and compact and make use of one storage room that I do have. I'm very fortunate to have one, but just being very smart and not overspending,
Hmm.
because if you're asked to move, you have a huge headache on your hands.
Yeah. Yeah. Tables and stations, if you think about a blended learning model, that was just a really great strategy. If you don't have the space and have the storage, some of those stackable bins and putting them in a corner or under a desk or wherever you can go, but being able to pull them out and create a space for students for that is a really great strategy.
Well, everyone, I've been popping in as many comments as I can into
Yeah.
the chat. This was a great presentation. There were a lot of great ideas I got out of it that I need to implement myself. Thank you so much. And can you please remind everyone how they can get in contact with you, even though it's on the scroll?
Yeah. Oh, for sure. On Twitter and Instagram at MRS_wine coop, WYNKOOP. Mrs. Winecoop on YouTube, and stay true to your shelf on TikTok.
Alrighty, and Lisa has summed it up just as well. I love this presentation, and I loved it too. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Thanks again. Take care.
Everyone, we're going to take a 30-minute break for lunch. So we are going to resume again at 2:45 Eastern Standard Time. So just 30 minutes from now, we will resume our afternoon session, which is really going to be dynamite. You don't want to miss it, okay? All right, see y'all in a little bit. Take care now.
Thank
Excellent
you.
job, Rebecca.
Bye-bye.
Excellent job.
Thank you.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.